Hello and welcome to Not Just Ads. What do you do when you're a media group of 100 plus media brands across TV, radio, news media, and online services? How do you grow the revenue? How do you align everybody inside and across the different brands? I caught up recently with Stefan Havik, Chief Digital Officer at DPG Media, and asked him how. Enjoy. Hi, Stefan. Welcome to Not Just Ads. And I feel those talk shows when they're saying to a guest, we have been trying to have you here for so long. It's a great opportunity for me to talk about you, your work at DPG Media, the group across two countries. But first, maybe for those that don't know DPG Media, it would be great to set the background.
Yeah, sure. So DPG Media has been around for a while. Started out with two loss-making print publications about 35 years ago. And by means of acquisitions, grew out to a network of over 100 brands spread across the Benelux and the Nordics, and currently employ 6,000 people, mostly in editorial. But we also operate not just in the editorial parts, but also in broadcasting. So we do news, we do radio, we do TV, and a thing we call online services, which is a mixture of classifieds, comparison websites, and apps. And roughly turnover is just around 1.8 billion, of which unfortunately still less than half is digital. So I'm doing my best to boost it over half. And we're doing well. So I think not all media owners are showing good results nowadays. It can be a tough business, but I think we're in a very healthy position. So,
And I'm glad that you're here because I think that a lot can be learned from what you have been doing. And just to give us an idea of the scale compared to Google, Facebook, Meta, and Amazon, etc., what is your scale in your countries?
yeah, yeah. So I'm glad you added in our countries, because if on a global level we're tiny, of course, we're a drop in the ocean. But in our local markets, I think from a reach perspective, it's comparable. So I think we roughly just reach the majority of the population every day. And so I think the frequency of usage of some of the global platforms is bigger. But I think for most agencies and advertisers, they would consider our network to have comparable reach. So I think it's sufficient.
Yes, and you pointed it out, the comparison between the global and the local. And I think, and we had the chance to discuss about this in the past as well. I mean, what counts is your universe, and your universe are these countries. So,
Exactly.
so it's important to adapt the strategy to what your universe is, to what
Exactly.
the background, what you're facing every day.
Absolutely. And I think our markets, I think it's a blessing that our markets are small language areas. So I think in our markets, local media is stronger than in most markets, like in English speaking markets, for instance.
The overall strategic direction since you joined, how did it evolve?
Um, I think on a group level, it changed from um, transforming our business to be suitable for digital. So I think we, as a group, we've been fairly slow in starting our digital journey. So when I joined, they were still in the midst of building proper reach in digital channels. But I think the big change we had is moving from building reach and volume in digital now to creating additional value for consumers. That's one. So I think from a feature perspective, from a content richness perspective, also in SVOD, our offering is, I would say, of very good quality. And our strategy now is digital value creation, which means how can we increase the perception of value of our digital products so we can charge the consumer roughly twice as much as we used to in the past. And I think the same value creation also applies to advertising. I think, and we'll probably dive into that later into detail, but our key objective is value perception also for advertisers and agencies. So basically means how can they get more effectiveness of our network? And
Absolutely, like a virtuous cycle, I guess.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
you develop an audience-centric approach, which widens your audience in terms of reach, but also in depth of engagement. And then you have the possibility to create more meaningful connections between the advertisers and your audience. Practically speaking, well, I mean, 100 companies in the group. How did you bring them all together?
Hard work.
How do you create alignment? Because I think that that's one of the biggest needs in media
Yeah.
today, in media companies, creating alignment of objectives and incentives.
Yeah. So I think what you just touched on is probably the most difficult thing in our group because it's so big. And it's especially difficult because we operate in different types of verticals. So you need to create alignment not just between like news brands, but also magazine brands and streaming brands, etc. So I think this has been the most difficult thing. And I think what we set out to do, I think 4 years ago, is to emphasize the mutual benefit we can create between brands. And that means we introduced a single sign-on, for instance, so a DPG Media account, which people felt a bit anxious about at first. If you run a brand like a news brand, you would want to communicate about that specific brand, not necessarily about sort of the DPG network part. But the upside when using not just your brand account, but a network account is users who visit your site for the first time can be automatically logged in if they have been logged in somewhere else before. So I think we spent a lot of time explaining the mutual benefits in terms of accounts, in terms of consent, in terms of leveraging the inventory we have. So obviously we have a lot of brands that need inventory to sell stuff, especially in the comparison and classifieds business. So I think we created benefits for the group or for every brand in the group to make sure everybody was comfortable in putting in the work to align to like a network strategy. But it was very tough. I mean, it's easier said than done, but it took us,
That definitely.
yeah, it took us up until like today. We're not done yet. So we've been working on this for 4 years and still you see brands who feel that they're more special than someone else and they should be treated differently. But especially
That will never
in
disappear.
it will never disappear. And I think especially if you try to build a network or if you try to create a scalable advertising offering, you need standardization. So we leave little room, especially in our ads business, or no room actually, for differentiation from a brand perspective. And sure, we appreciate the uniqueness of a brand, but that's more about the audience that visited that brand and not about the sort of technical setup or the formats or how we sell the product.
In football terms, you have served me with a fantastic opportunity to score a goal now. And so let's take a step back on this point, and then we'll come back to DPG Media. Do you think that this approach will ever be possible in other countries among different media brands? This working together, a media alliance that truly works together.
Um, hmm. Yes and no. I think no, not in the way they approach it now. So we also have been part in some alliances in our local markets. You see the Ozone Project, where the guys there, Danny, Craig are doing a great job, I think. Um, there's alliances like that all over the place. But from that perspective, my answer will be no, it's not possible. And why? Because none of the connected media owners are all in. And I think
Yes.
as long as you're sort of just dipping your toe in and consider it as just a demand source for your business, I think
Thank
it
you.
might be a nice revenue stream, but it's all in, or it won't sort of be
Thank you,
very
Stefan.
successful.
Thank you, Stefan. I feel like a broken record, and hearing someone else saying it, it's really comforting.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. But back to DPG Media, standardization, the trusted web.
Yes.
What is the
Trusted
trusted
web.
web?
Yeah. So actually, the term trusted web was an internal working name
Yes.
for, yeah, like the positioning we wanted to achieve about 5 years ago when the discussions around fake news and hate speech and brand safety were probably at its peak. Um, we decided internally to label, especially our global competitors, as toxic. And we were planning to focus on our only USP is the fact that we produce quality content made by humans, by journalists, by editors, and um, we take responsibility for what happens on our platform. So we labeled it internally as toxic versus trusted. And by accident, someone mentioned that sort of narrative to a local publication who ran an article about it, and then the trusted web was born as a concept.
You're
And the
not
trusted
referring
web,
to me, right?
no.
Okay.
I think it was someone else. So I think the um, proposition is very simple. Like on one hand, you have the whole brand safety, brand suitability piece, where we deliver just a network of professionally produced content. Where I think the discussion about brand suitability or safety, I think it's kind of irrelevant. I know people still consider news as scary stuff, um, but I think advertisers are leaning in towards the idea of if it's produced by a professional, it should be okay. For those who still think it might be scary, we have the former GARM, which I'm sad that happened the way it happened. But they had a fantastic brand suitability framework, which we operate, also make available in our self-serve service platforms, so you can be risk-free. So that's one part. The second part is about supply path optimization. So we try to build the most direct access to our inventory possible. We're not so much a fan of open market because of the lack of control we have as a media owner. And I know and I fully understand, being a former media buyer, that obviously price can be an interesting USP for open market because there's just cheap inventory. I think for our positioning, it's good that now it's also a lot of crappy inventory, so that helps. But I think supply path optimization for us means creating private marketplace setups that actually add value on competing price points and our own tech. So we've spent a lot of money on building our own platforms. The first one we launched was Data Lab, which houses all first-party data we have, which is a lot. So we have more than half of our users are logged in every day. And it also
So
has
can we say it's almost 50% of the population of your countries?
52 actually, to be
52.
exact. Yeah, to be very exact.
More than
Yeah,
half.
and we're going up to 75% next year. And we'll never get higher than 50% because we also have traffic from social media, for instance, who visit our article and leave. So we won't get them to log in, and it's fine. But most of the frequent users are logged in anyway. And so we make that data available in our data lab platform, and clients can onboard their own CRM. So it's also a data clean room. And we launched our media buying platform, originally named Ad Manager. it does what it says on the tin. So you can buy your media directly. Sort of DSP-like functionality, but easier to operate, to buy on our network. And then the third part of the proposition is data identity. So we've been focusing on logged in users, as you already mentioned, and basically we have 52% logged in, but we have a first party ID on everybody in our network. And the ID is consistent, and that's obviously a thing that's useful nowadays, and we're not very bothered by mobile identifiers disappearing, browsers deprecating cookies. I think that's not too much of an issue for us because of our methods of identifying an individual on a first party basis. And we make that available in private market for buyers to run against that ID, and obviously on our own tech. And the difference between the two, on our own tech, the identifier is stable. So it's a thing you can use for campaigns spanning across months, if you would like. And in private market, we rotate the IDs on a weekly basis just to avoid any leakage. And obviously, to that identity, we have the data sets we have from our subscribers, from people who log in. So a lot of declared stuff and stuff we observe in terms of behavior on our network. And the last part is we've invested a lot in custom formats. So we saw when I started, the majority of the volume came through the all old and known rectangle. But I think that's from a user experience, but also from an effectiveness perspective for an advertiser, kind of a crappy format. CTRs below 0.1% doesn't do much for brand lift. So we decided to create custom formats, and those are only available in our own ad tech. And they perform well, and it's not, and obviously that's of course what I would say, but I think we've been struggling a lot for probably everybody has, to drive direct response as a local media business. I think local media businesses have been notoriously bad at that. I think developing the formats who are just designed around how your apps behave just allow you to make a big step in that sort of performance part of the business. And we invested a lot in brand lift research. So I think most people are comfortable with the notion of quality media affects brand in a better way than crappy media, but always tough to prove. So we run brand lift studies on every campaign.
A lot, the usual suspects will say, oh, but that's easy. With those resources, with 100 media brands, I'm saying it's not easy at all. It takes time. It's not
It took us
something
4
that you
years.
build overnight.
No,
So
exactly.
how
It took us a long time.
absolutely. So what is being, you think, the decisive factor in how did you bring everybody behind you,
Yeah.
and
So yeah,
how did you persuade all the different stakeholders with very often different incentives?
that's a great question. I think so. We have one thing that is different for our business than some other businesses, and that's the fact that we're family owned still. So we have one owner. And when I joined, we immediately sort of agreed on this is the strategy. So I think the fact that the owner, Christian Ventillo, and Eric, the CEO, were on board from the start. So we all saw that the market was moving towards a space where media owners have less control. Inventory was available in abundance. Basically, everybody was becoming part of some commodity type of business. And the only way to get out is to take a risk and build stuff yourself and try to diversify. So try to get your ad products out of the commodity stuff. And that's what we did. But that also meant we took some short-term hits. So for instance, we started out by, so the first thing we did was try to make the private market more attractive. So all the product we developed, new formats, data propositions, we made only available in private market. And we did a pricing strategy where we decreased private market prices and increased open market prices gradually to make sure we make the stuff we sell directly is more attractive. And that definitely cost us some revenue in the first 2 to 3 years, for sure. And I think the fact that we're family owned means it's a hit we'll take. Like, it's fine. Yeah,
And
go ahead.
are you bringing external participants as well in this network, or is it
Yes.
exclusively DPG Media brands?
No. So we have a big owned and operated network, but we also have a third-party network. So, for instance, in the Dutch market, we also have RTL, a big broadcaster, Talpa, one of the other big broadcasters, and a long tail as well. So I think that's also one of the reasons our scale is sufficient. If you look at our reach in our owned and operated network, sure, we're big, but I think if you add these external partners, especially the frequency part improves, and that's that just helps in creating a better offering.
Taking a step back on the data platform, what is your relationship? What is your engagement about data with advertisers?
Yeah, so I think we launched our data platform in 2021 or two, and I think we built it because we felt we needed to protect our data, and acknowledging that clients still wanted to use our data. And from the protection perspective, we have a very simple rule, which is if I can explain it to my mom, we'll do it. Because we were still unclear, and actually until today, still unclear what GDPR actually means. So that sort of simple compass helped us. And we decided to take data out of the open market, protect it, but still make it available through a self-service platform called Data Lab, where a client can onboard their CRM lists just through like an API. And what it allows them to do is get insights. So they upload like 1 million CRM records and they get insights like benchmarked against our network. They can activate the data, they can model it. So like lookalike modeling with a simple UI where you can make the trade-off yourself between scale and accuracy. And you can exclude, if you would want to exclude your existing customers from the campaign you run. And you can activate on the whole network, including streaming, connected TV, like anywhere.
In terms of identity resolution, did you build the DPG ID from scratch? Have you been using external partners? How did you approach it?
Yeah, so I think we have been using external partners in the beginning. Piano was our data management platform at the time, but we redid the architecture ourselves, and we have like an identity waterfall. So it uses a few components. It uses our subscriber ID, it uses our login ID, it uses our consent ID, and our tracking IDs. We mix them all together, and out comes a DPG Media online ID, whole mouthful. But that's technology we built ourselves. And the tracking part is different than most media owners would use. So we use Snowplow, so we don't use GA. But all that stuff together builds just a solid sort of identity graph. And that's a strong solution for our owned and operated network. we'll still need external solutions for stuff outside of our owned and operated network. So to activate it on our partner network. And that's a thing where we are looking for external solutions. Or that might sound strange, fingerprinting. Obviously a term that's a bit tainted, but as long as you have proper consent, the methods of identification don't really matter.
This takes me to a big topic, but I don't want to deep dive into the topic in itself, Google's dominance, but rather asking you, because I remember we spoke for many years about Google's dominance and the need for you to become independent. And even today, I'm being somehow going against the tide, saying, okay, well, Google's dominance, yes, obviously everybody can see the impact on the industry, but I think that the biggest damage was for those that wanted to play into that arena, which is the programmatic open marketplace, and didn't really work on taking back control. What have you done? How have you seen it? How have you approached it? And how do you feel today?
Wow, that's a big question,
Yeah,
Alessandro.
existential almost.
Yeah. So okay. So let me take a step back to 2019. When I joined DPG, it was in the midst of all the discussions around unified pricing. I think most people will remember. I think for us, a company who were already uncomfortable with the lack of control we had, with the quality of ads, we like for us that was the last drop. So we felt, okay, now we have to change this stuff, because we saw 2 or 3 potential scenarios. One was just deal with it, give it all to Google, be dependent on open market, but then we would have to rethink our cost structure on the back end, because it definitely would have been too expensive to operate, because we're a fairly sales heavy business. We have a lot of people who drive a car, go to an advertiser or an agency and drink coffee and have lunches and stuff. So that scenario is the thing we were uncomfortable with, because it also meant you have no control at all and it becomes very unpredictable. The second one, and that's a thing many media owners did, was focus on subscription revenue, which isn't a bad scenario per se. And we have more than half of our revenue is subscription revenue. In digital, it's roughly half and half. Half is ads, half is subscriptions. But we felt uncomfortable being dependent on just one revenue stream. It just makes you a bit exposed when stuff goes wrong from an economics perspective. So we thought, okay, so the only option we really have is to think how we can get some more control, look at our tech setup, and we actually acquired a company called Sonoma, which gave us enough scale to rethink our tech architecture. We partnered with AppNexus. I think might have already been Xander at the time. I've worked with them for many years in the past as well. And they gave us a technology solution where we could have some more control. So their technology infrastructure was more open. So it allowed us to build stuff on top. And also from a transparency perspective. So what Google did at the same time in the unified pricing discussion is deprecate the log level data files. We had to basically assess, are they doing stuff in our best interest or not? Obviously under the term of privacy. And AppNexus felt like the right partner for us at the time. So we started with them to gradually move out of the open market. And obviously a lot of stuff has happened since, but we also have been less influenced by all the Google decisions since 2020 because we took that step. So I think I understand it's difficult for most. I think the Google market share from a media owner perspective is probably around 90%. They have their strong USP, like the whole AdX suite, the AdWords demand. That's a strong proposition. But their take rate is really high, of course, which is also now interesting to see in the files happening in the US. But I think the thing I'm a bit more anxious about now is their stance around privacy sandbox, which are just this sort of thing difficult to grasp. They change a lot in terms of direction. The CMA is on it, of course, and I'm glad they didn't take the last sort of step Google proposed, as in let's give the control to the consumer and it will all be fine. I'm glad the CMA still saw it could still disturb the market a bit. So we still feel that there's stuff we should keep an eye on from the perspective of Google. But I think we're comfortable having taken all these steps and taken control to our own business. But I have to admit, Google is still a big partner of ours. So we still work with them on a lot of spaces. So it's not that we don't work with them at all. We work with them as a provider of our workspace. So we run their Google suite. So on 6,000 laptops. We work with them from a search perspective. We're probably one of their biggest advertisers. So the relationship with them is good, but we're always... I think aware of potential misuse of their advertising infrastructure.
Sure, and that doesn't mean, as you're saying, that there needs to be a conflict. It's just about working in your own interest and then having control of your assets.
Exactly.
I think at the end of the day, and because change never stops. The last technical question: AI. Are you experimenting? How are you tackling it? Is it a challenge or an opportunity?
Both. So we do a lot in that space. I think we all saw the rise of ChatGPT. I think it was November 22, right? The big launch and the big uptake in usage of ChatGPT, where we started actually with GPT 2.0 in 2018 or 19, I think it was. And we built a first prototype of a website or actually a news app, which didn't see the light of day. So it was only run internally, where we experimented with basically an editorial team only giving the input of an article being one sentence or maybe two, and then the machine would write the whole article. The only thing that we learned there is the bias towards the training data. So we trained it and during US elections. So if there would have been an article about like a big accident here on the street down the road, it would start with, there's an ambulance came, or maybe a helicopter. And then all of a sudden it started to include the Republicans and the Democrats. And then at the end of the day, it was always Trump. So we came to the conclusion GPT-2 at the time definitely wasn't good enough. But 3.5, I think it was, late 22, definitely allowed us to do more. And I think the first thing we launched early 23 was AI assistance in our ad tech. So the first assistant we launched, I think it was March 23, was an assistant in Data Lab who basically did the heavy lifting for you in building an audience. So you just give it some input, your campaign name and a short description, and it would go and find and suggest, so this is the targeting setup I would use. So that was the first thing we did. And after that, it took off. And we basically use it now internally for two solutions. One is as a means to codify the tacit knowledge of all people who work in our business. I think the challenge there is still the quality of documentation. So we're very advanced there in everything around IT and advertising, and like where everything we do is fairly well documented, and we have a support agent which you can query and basically ask anything you want, and it'll give you really good answers. So we run a model on the back of Microsoft Azure, and that's where we build our AI tech on. And so that gives a lot of benefits in terms of getting the knowledge level of our people on par. And the other part is where we try to make quick actions available. So if you're in an ad server or in an order management system, with a right mouse click on the order number, you can do quick actions like check pacing or send an email to a client or do all sorts of stuff that would require a lot of manual work and a lot of steps. And we just automate it. And we also do stuff like that in the editorial teams. So you can check the article you just wrote, check it on facts, check it on spelling mistakes, check it on whatever you want. So we do a lot there, and we even have tools for editorial teams to help them brainstorm about certain angles for coverage on a specific topic. And I think out of the 6,000 people working in our business, we have now roughly 2,500 users of our AI tools internally. And obviously the step for us, which is maybe even more important, is the step towards consumer-facing products. So we have some in the advertising space, in Data Lab, in Ad Manager, where you can create varieties of your ads with a click of a button. And for consumers, they can already be exposed by some short summaries. So we in some articles, we create AI-generated summaries, and we're now working on a user interface where you can query the news. So, for instance, I think it was the Washington Post who have a very good part of their site and app, which is about climate change, and you can basically get to know everything you want about climate change by like prompting. So that's stuff we're working on in that space. And you also mentioned the challenge part. I think that evolves around intellectual property. We look at it from two perspectives. So the sort of input side and the output side of a large language model. So the input side, where your data can be used to train a language model. Our position is we don't allow crawlers on our site because we don't want it to be input for a large language model unless there's some term of agreement. However, there are still businesses who still crawl or hide behind the fact that they don't own the crawler they use. I won't name anyone, but
We know who they are.
yeah,
And if you are listening, we are coming for you.
we're coming for you. Yeah, but we're also at the same time not overestimating how valuable our input is. Like you don't need us to train a language model. So the value of the content library we have is limited in that space. On the output side though, so where a user writes a prompt and gets feedback, where you already see input or news being used in answers in Google's AI products. In OpenAI, they have this also like a new snippet functionality. That's where the value is. So if the data is real time, if it's factual, if it's of high quality, then that's stuff that definitely adds value. And that's where we're discussing now with both Google, OpenAI, about in what kind of manner should we include this in their offering, or will we stay out? So those are ongoing discussions, and we're not yet in the space where some others are, that they take them to court. I just want to have a proper conversation first.
I often ask this to my guests. What advice can you give to smaller publishers? You have worked across the whole spectrum of the industry, so it's not just being chief digital officer of a group with 100 brands.
Yeah.
Do you have any, especially on the topic which I'm quite obsessed about, of alignment, alignment of objectives, incentives?
Yeah, so I think if I start with that one, I think alignment of objectives for me evolves about creating a value exchange which is beneficial for everybody. So articulating really clearly what the benefit is for the group and what the benefit is for the individual brand. Um, Easier said than done. So I think even for us, where we are family owned, we're a very, I would say, tightly run business. It still took us years to get everybody aligned, just from the cultural perspective. I think we're almost there. Um, I think the biggest learning I've had, especially in the ads side of the business, is, um, and the tip I would give, get buy side people in your team. I think a proper understanding of how the guy on the other side, who's hands on keyboards buying campaigns, looks at this stuff. Like a proper understanding. How do they buy? How do they respond to what kind of pitches? I think, obviously, coming from the buy side myself helped, but hiring people from the buy side as well, like Simon Harris and other folks from Group M, definitely helped us evolve our proposition and having the right focus on what matters most in the end for an advertiser, like the actual outcome of your advertising offering. And all the stuff we've developed in the past years have been focused around one thing. It's improve performance, because we knew, just from a performance perspective, like I said before, direct response, we weren't good enough, like not even close. From a brand perspective, I think we thought we were good, but we couldn't prove it. So everything we did wasn't to improve prices or anything else. It evolved around improving advertiser outcome, nothing else. So I think being laser focused on that and having people in your team who understand that, I think that makes the difference. And then you should think about what strategy to run. For instance, either just sell your stuff cheaply in open market, because price can also be a differentiator when it comes to output, of course. And if it's about building the right skill, and if you're not, if you don't have the means to do acquisitions and build a big network, just collaborate. I think if you look at, for instance, Ozone or Pangea Alliance, like all those alliances that are there, just use them and go all in.
That's fantastic advice. But you triggered another question. I said it's the last one, but no, I
Sure.
have one last one, which is, you mentioned advertising, and yeah, and I mentioned in the incentives. How do you make sure that your advertising team is not only judged or rewarded on revenue, and does not conflict with what your subscription teams or your the other revenue channels of your company have
Yeah.
with their objectives? How do you mitigate and manage and create harmony?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we actually have a team who operates as, let's say, a referee. So of course we have actually three revenue lines that compete for all the pixels on the screen, and of course we need to run content. I cannot forget that we actually have a product consumers want to use. But we want to sell subscriptions, we want to sell ads, and we want to get traffic to our comparison and classified sites. So we have three competitors, and we have a network set up where we have a framework where marketing positions for subscriptions, advertising positions, online services positions are set. But we look and evaluate the best setup continuously. And we even have positions that are dynamic. So based on the user, we decide, oh, the likelihood of this individual buying a subscription is zero. so let's bombard him with ads. Or the other way around. So the likelihood, the propensity to buy is really high. We'll take away all the ads, and we'll show him stuff that will persuade him to actually make that last step and buy a subscription. So we try to solve that by having a referee to arbiter between all the teams. And we're building technology to automate that and make it more dynamic.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Stefan. Well, I'm sure you will be back with new stuff. You're like a volcano, always thinking of something new. And meanwhile, all the best to you.
Thank you.